a guest is a moderator and a panel as well. I'm going to introduce shortly Julie Robertson. She will be speaking to ADHD professionals and entrepreneurs about overcoming workplace challenges to succeed and insights from those people. Just a little bit of a background on Julie. She is a diversity inclusion specialist, an executive leader with experience in government, community and corporate sectors to develop impactful programs and solutions for marginalised individuals and communities. She's the inaugural CEO of Specialist Intern Australia, and she's championed inclusive employment for neurodivergent individuals. I hope I've done you justice there, Julie.
Thank you for that, Rob. Thank you, everyone, and welcome. As Rob said, I am today's panel moderator. We have an interesting group of guests. And as Rob said, I have an interest in this myself, having spent 5 and a bit years as CEO at Specialist Intern Australia, which is specifically set up to actually look at improving the employment prospects of neurodivergent people. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the people of the Wurundjeri Nation, and the owners of who are the owners of the Kulin Nation, and are the traditional people on the land in which we live, work and meet online today. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are the first people of this great nation. I'm going to start by introducing our panel members. We have an interesting mix today. I felt it was important to put a balanced panel together if we're going to talk about employment experiences. So we all know that the reason why we're talking about employment experiences of ADHD is because they can be quite different. They have a life to themselves in terms of what road they go, and they can go either one way or the other. And most people at some point in their life of work and seeking to find your vocation when you're an ADHD person can experience struggles to maintain the focus or the momentum to stay in an area or to get to where you want to be. I'll be speaking to a mix of people that are adults who are all ADHD, have had a range of different experiences in their journeys in terms of the date or the time frame of their diagnosis, round to where they've ended in their career or where they're currently at in their career just now. Our panel members today are Rebecca McClendon. And Rebecca has also been involved in some of the other presentations, so you might have heard about Rebecca already. Rebecca, I will introduce you when we move to first question, but Rebecca is a late diagnosed ADHD professional and a behaviour support specialist, and I'll talk more about that when we get to your first question. Our other speakers include Crawford Ross. Crawford Ross is an ADHD professional financial planner, and Crawford, another late diagnosed individual, and we'll dig into that when we get to questions. In addition to Crawford and Rebecca, we have Andrew Thompson, who is the Executive Director of a creative agency and also on the board of ADHD Australia. And last but by no means least, we have Melissa Webster. Can't even tell you how long it would take me to tell you about all the businesses that Melissa is involved in, but we will get to that at some point. And Melissa is also the CEO of ADHD Australia, as well as being a Chief Executive Member of Melba Support Services. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Julie. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you.
So I'm going to dig in because I know that we don't have a lot of time and there's so much that I want to hear and learn from each of you. I think that you've got so much to add in terms of the diversity of experiences here. What I will say is that we have got the hour. And for people on the chat, I apologise in advance. We have a lot of questions amongst ourselves here, so we might not get a chance to ask chat-based questions. If we do, we'll take some from the chat towards the last 5 minutes. We will work our hardest to stay within the realms of a 3-minute scope response to each of the questions, but I will start with you, Beck.
Yeah.
So, Rebecca, you are a behaviour support manager, a specialist in autism and neurodiversity, a qualified behaviour analyst, if you like. Have I missed anything?
No, that's about it.
That's about it. And you spent on looking at behaviour, supporting people in this type of field to actually positively work towards their goals and aspirations and make sure that they can contribute like everyone else. But you didn't diagnosis till later yourself.
Yeah, I was just over 30 when I received my own diagnosis. I didn't recognise it in myself at all because, well, all I'd seen so far was the representation of it in young boys and young girls as well, but I'd never seen it in women, so I didn't know what to look for.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And the reason why I was keen to talk with you is because I recently listened to your podcast that you kindly gave to the Brave Feminine Leadership series around your own challenges when you were in the workspace and potentially unknowingly dealing with your ADHD and how to navigate people, the workplace politics, and how we work inside neurotypical organisations and environments. Can you tell me a bit about what the specific challenges were that you had in work in relation to what you know now is mostly your ADHD traits?
Yeah. So I think, what drove me to get an ADHD diagnosis is because I was just continuously struggling with things like time management and the distractibility. So in my work, I have to balance kind of working to tight deadlines, working with families, working with the children directly, managing a team. There was lots of different kind of plates to spin, and I often found myself, I actually would blame the workplace a lot of the time. I would say that it was too busy, I was overworked and things like that. And I guess, I don't know what happened, but I came to the realization it was actually, I was just not managing my time well at all. So I would overpromise myself. I would think that activities would take way less time than they actually would. So I wouldn't account for the time properly. I would think to myself, oh, I'm going to go and see that kid in room 10. I would go down thinking I'd spent 10 minutes there and it had actually been 2 hours. And now I'm behind on my reports. And then I'm chatting to someone else. And before I know it, the day had finished and I'd actually finished no work at all. Like I'd got nothing done. I'd started lots of things. I'd started lots of different reports or, half written emails here and there. My draft inbox was always so full of emails. But yeah, time management and distractibility were really the main things that I struggled with.
And did it impact any of your role performance or like your job security in any, like, was it a concern so much as that there was flags towards your performance?
Yeah, probably. Like I was grateful and lucky, I guess, that I had really supportive managers. So they would recognize I would struggle with things like deadlines, and they would give me a lot of kind of advice on how to get there sooner. I would still, it still wouldn't work a lot of the time. Honestly, I could see that if I didn't provide some of the outcomes I was supposed to provide, I would work overtime. So sometimes I'd be doing like 12, 13, 14-hour days just to fit in 4 hours worth of work because I'd spent time kind of being distracted through the day. So I found I actually worked better at home where there was less distractions. So I would, work late to keep my job, I guess.
So that leads me to the next question then, because obviously if you had navigated those or had those challenges, I wanted to ask you about what sort of self-realization or what you identified as being the potential strategies or the things that you needed to get through or get by. And that question relates to pre-diagnosis. Like, what did you do to get by pre-diagnosis, and what did you do and what helped strategy-wise once you had the knowledge to hand?
Pre-diagnosis, it was pretty much what I've just described. It was working late, working overtime, crying a lot, getting back into it, doing it again. Like I really love my job and I love the people I worked with. So that motivated me to continue working overtime and spinning my wheels, like I heard in one of the previous talks. I remember when I first was going through my assessment for ADHD, my mindset was like, I'm going to get a diagnosis and then I'm going to be on medication and then I'm going to be fine. like it'll fix everything. And medication did definitely help initially. It did help me to focus, but for me, in the end, it wasn't the right choice. So I kind of came to a realization that I spent my life helping other people set up environmental supports to allow them to be their best selves and live a better quality of life. And why wasn't I applying those same strategies to my own life? So I did that. And I think part of what's kind of helped me in work is getting the ADHD diagnosis really allowed me to unmask and to start to learn to just be my authentic self. And when I started to be more compassionate towards myself, I think I modeled that to the people around me as well, who over time, like, realized maybe I need instructions in writing. Like, you can't just tell me something. If you're going to come up to me with a verbal instruction, also put it on the Post-it note on my desk. My manager would tell me the deadline was 3 days before it actually was. Like, things, they're the
one of my favorite strategies.
Yeah. But I think I'm really lucky to be able to manage my own calendar. And what I've figured helps for me now is I categorize things by like brain task. And I can't think of a better way to describe it, but instead of thinking like case by case for the people I work with and doing like the report, the visit, the phone calls, whatever, I set my calendar up so that Mondays is kind of like a planning day and get myself together day. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I schedule myself back to back supervision so that all my brain has to think about is like supervision. It doesn't have to think about changing to a phone call, then doing a report, then following through an Excel spreadsheet. Like it's just one track of like, I'm talking to people and I'm helping them. And then on Friday, I do the Excel spreadsheets in the morning. And then in the afternoon, it's the report writing. So
you've used extensive periods of time blocking.
Yeah. So one of my staff looked at my calendar the other day and said it nearly gave him an anxiety attack because it was so like back to back with no breaks. And I think one of the strategies people see a lot is take lots of breaks. But for me, I learned that didn't work. It's easier for me to kind of get in the hyper-focus zone and just keep going, keep going basically. And then, block it by activity.
Yeah, that's a really good insight, but also really, really important to like as a statement there, saying that might work for some, but that doesn't work for everyone. So that is good that you've acknowledged that that's something that you need is to keep it tight, to keep it back to back, and make sure that you chunk down the tasks and work through them. Thank you for that, Beck.
Yeah.
I will come back to you, but I'm actually going to introduce Crawford Ross, a fellow Scot. Welcome, Crawford. If I didn't give it away, I don't know what would, but Crawford is a master's of different types of degrees. How many degrees have you got now? 2, 3? Yeah. And now looking at financial advisor and planning.
There's a couple in there, yeah.
Qualification.
Uni was my happy place.
Yes, studying in academia and learning. I mean, you do have a strong interest in finance, project management, strategy and consultancy, which has led you to different careers and different experiences so far. And I know from our interactions and our discussions, as a late diagnosed ADHD, that has also for you been something that you've really had to tackle and negotiate to think about where you go career-wise and what you want to do professionally. So I'm so grateful to have you here, and I do want to delve in with you a bit about your experience and what that's meant for you on your career journey. So I'll start by asking you about your late diagnosis and just your thoughts on how you feel just now, where you're at in your career and where you're at professionally, and whether or not you think that the ADHD diagnosis coming late or not having that awareness of the ADHD has impacted you in any way.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. First of all, you're doing a great job, so thank you. Really appreciate it, and I know how hard you've worked here. But yeah, it is. It's a funny one. There's a lot of things I have done. Being the host and a moderator of an ADHD conference panel is not one that I would try, because I think that would be the hardest job in the world. So great job there. But yeah, it's So when I was looking back, so it was a late diagnosis, right? And you go through that, replaying your whole life in the rearview mirror, and you go through the grief stage, and then you go through the over-optimism, and then you find a bit of a balance. And, we'll talk about it later on, but it's a fundamental part of who I am, right? For all the good bits. It's not a thing that's been foisted upon me. It's just who I am. And it's a process of knowing what makes you tick. But I was, as an ADHD person, right, we're very good with analogies. So I thought it's not a bad one to start. Now, this is quite UK focused, and there's a lot of us here. But if anyone remembers Woolies back in the UK, so not the Woolies that we have here in Australia, but I mean, this was the greatest place ever, right? You would go in and you would get a pick and mix and a Linkin Park CD, and you'd get your school books and some underwear, and it was magic. It was amazing, right? It's not around anymore. So the point being is it did all these great things, but it just had no executive function. It had no consistency. The strategy wasn't there, right? So, taking a bit of pausing to reflect and look back, I realized that, early career, a lot of decisions were maybe made through interest and novelty and, wanting to try new things, move to the other side of the world, consulting, finance, following passion, which was great at the time. And, there wasn't really a master plan, in the rearview mirror. You craft a story and a narrative, and it starts to work. But I think that was, a real sort of feature up until now, was that sort of lack of coherency. Specific to the ADHD diagnosis then, which I think is where I could actually identify, first of all, that I had ADHD in the diagnosis journey, and then, how that had impacted. And it was, like a lot of us here, it was sort of off the back of COVID. So I'd gone to business school and, maybe reflected. Uni was ironically a sort of a safe space. It was a place where I could go and it had the right amount of structure, motivation, external drive, also the ability to prove that, hey, I'm not lazy and I'm not just some fun-loving guy who doesn't really care about his career. I really care, and I've got the heck step to prove it. I'm all in, and I didn't realize why I loved that, that situation, and I excelled at it to a degree, but had challenges elsewhere. And obviously, so post business school and a trip to America, then I'd come back and I got this dream job, and then boom, COVID, and so everyone's had a pretty rough time with COVID. And my son, Alex, was born first day of lockdown. So, in this rock and hard place of this new dream job, this incredible upheaval, new parenthood thrown into the mix. And, it was a very challenging time, right? For a lot of us, and that just sort of encapsulated it. So it did two things. It was a really challenging one personally, and one I've reflected a lot on, but it also put me down the road to the financial advisor path that I'm on just now. So, without going too much into that, but what I also then did was, I gave up drinking, and I thought, right, I'm really going to commit to this. If I've got to become a financial planner, one of the key pieces you have to do is go back and do this apprenticeship, essentially, this professional year. And it is, you're doing all the lower level admin function tasks for quite a long time now, coming out of, a high level of education and a lot of experience and management consulting. I knew I had the capabilities and I knew what the end goal was, but I have to do these mechanical tasks, to be polite about them, right? No problem. I'm all in, I'm committed. And I've also quit drinking. And that's where suddenly I found myself sitting at my desk, and it was this realization where I'm like, what's going on here? I've not had a hangover for 6 months. I'm not distracted by the weekend. I'm not, there's nothing else. I'm just really struggling. And it was the most ADHD unfriendly thing you could have. A task list of 150 tasks, open up an application form, do this, it was, everything that we now know struggle with. So fast forward, that led to the questioning, the psychologist appointment, what's going on, the referral, and in the rearview mirror going, great. So cut a long story short, as we're going to do, that realization that, it was always that I was gravitating towards the end goal and the strategy and the people aspect and the things that light you up and that you're really, really good at, or can be, but just falling short of getting there, because you're always having to start in the support role. And, a lot of these professional services, you are the support role. You're the associate, the senior associate to the director, who relies on you to do a lot of the admin and the project management so they can do the bits that you're good at. So it was role reversal. And I have had times in the past where, in management roles, I've had an assistant manager, and I was like, wow, now knowing how incredible that is, but it's a hard thing to ask for. So yeah, it's in the rearview mirror, understanding that it had always been there, and that was a challenge. So now, working with it and getting through.
So I'm going to take you somewhere else, and I want the audience to hold on to the point that you just made about when there is changeability in your career and you are quite ambitious or you're focused or passionate about something, but you always have to either take a step back if you're wanting to learn a new thing or passionate about a new piece, and you don't get that opportunity to start in a lead role or in an area where you can drive it. You're often doing things that aren't friendly for ADHD. You're doing that sort of BAU, really sort of process-driven tasks to get yourself up to where you need to be. And that will lead us into the conversation about why some people do choose to set up on their own. We will go there. But I want to ask you, Crawford, and thank you for sharing that, because I know it's very recent and I know it's all currently happening just now, and I know you're still navigating that, but I think it's important that we all look at ADHD as having both sides. This session is not about we're all superheroes with superpowers. I think it's really important to acknowledge to the audience that there is struggles and that we all do struggle at parts of our careers. And even when we are successful, there are things that behind the scenes that we've had to work on a lot and continue to have to work on to keep the engines going. So the next thing I'm going to ask you is, with the hindsight of having your diagnosis and knowing what you know now about yourself and the challenges that you have, what are some of the strategies and some of the things that you are applying now or that you are going to do to take you forward to that next goal of where you want to be with the financial planning and the excitement piece about financial planning with a focus on neurodivergence?
Yeah, no, that's the end goal. I'm going to answer this in the pyramid principle, because that's something I learned in consulting, which I got pulled up on once. But, there's probably 3 key things that really, reflecting on it is, first of all, and this is generalized, right? You're going to know yourself, and you're going to know, like, we share these common traits and this thread and, things that challenge. We're all very different, right? And I think Beck just listed about 4 or 5 of the same things that I realize now I need on a strategic level. And it might not be the same for other people, but, you got to know who yourself, know your drivers, but communicate that better. And that's been a real failing for me, personally, right? Is the shame that comes with struggling with the easy things, knowing that you're good at the hard things. It's this weird, role reversal. So you're struggling under the weight of 4 or 5 different directors throwing tasks at you, and it's PowerPoint decks, and it's, it's diary management, and it's not the hard stuff per se, but you just get weighed under, right? So being able to communicate now and go, well, actually, I'm struggling, and saying no sometimes in that space and just defending your space. And that kind of leads to the third one, which is being really in control of your surroundings and advocating for yourself. And I think that's something that I'm really sort of realizing at the moment. I'm 41, I'm late diagnosed, but I've got a young family. We're going through a house renovation, going through the training year, and there's a lot of upheaval. And I've really noticed how much that's impacted me. It's defend your physical, mental health, and this is appropriate for every professional, right? ADHD, neurotypical, neurodivergent or not, but it's accentuated, and it's just knowing that it's that lack of balance. Sometimes it's when things are good, wow, they're really good. I'm a downhill skier, and when things are bad, oh my god, I'm like it's that holding the beach ball underwater analogy, right? It's just like, so I think really just defending your own space, I think, is a big one, and and more of a sort of strategic perspective I've noticed recently. And there's a couple of things that the things that got you there won't get you there, sort of thing. Whereas, I realize now, and university was a great example. Yeah, great. I can write a dissertation in literally 2 nights. I met up with an old university friend who's still a bit annoyed with me that he spent so much time on his dissertation, and I just smashed it out in 2 days. And now that's not a boast. That's going, well, actually, that's what I needed to do it, right? And it was, probably needed a bit of editing, but
your brain works.
Yeah, and what I've realized now is, relying on, this is pre-medication, relying on adrenaline and fear and that as a motivator, right? Such a classic ADHD behavior. That's not great in a corporate environment, right? You can't leave things to the last minute. Now, that's a bit of an aside. Adam Grant does talk about how that leads to better ideas. The first draft's usually a rubbish one anyway. So I go through that period of, positive procrastination. But yeah, a lot of those old techniques and tricks, they're not relevant. And I'm 41, right? And I've realized that partly just getting a bit older and also a different stage, that, the short-term memory issue is quite a thing, but it's that processing of information is really one thing that I've noticed stands out. It's not understanding, it's not conceptualizing, it's not anything that's intelligence per se. It's not being able to sit there and communicate and read the room. It's sometimes, where is it? I remember the first time I got a job, in investment bank back office, and I had 2 screens, and I'd gone from, 2000, I went to uni, and having 1 screen and everything's handwritten, to 2 screens, multiple tabs open. And still to this day, I'm like, if I didn't put something somewhere, I struggle to remember where it was. So if I don't,
what I use 2 screens for.
and it's, and that's it. And it's, it's being able to create your surroundings that work for you, and
Exactly.
just know where you put things.
That's a good segue. So thank you for that, and I will come back to you again. I'm not finished with anyone yet. There's more questions to come, but getting something that works for you, getting an environment that works for you, and getting a rhythm that works for you is something that I'm going to move on to, and I'm going to introduce Andrew Thompson. Andrew, it's so nice to have you here, and I am really interested to learn from your take on this, because your experience specifically in work and career life has been that you were a professional, you were working in professional environments, you did unconsciously work in a certain way and succeed, but noted yourself even pre-diagnosis that there was going to have to be things that you would do to allow yourself to thrive and succeed in a way that you wanted to. And I'm really keen to hear about that. So what motivated you, Andrew, to become self-employed and start your own business?
Thank you for having me. Yes, what motivated me was I fell into it, to be honest. I studied law. I was going to be a barrister. Did 6 years. Realized at the end that I wasn't going to be a good lawyer. My legal studies were indicative, actually. I only had 2 performances, brilliant and appalling. So what Crawford just said about, I'm really good at some things and then really terrible at the simple ones was me. When I say I'm 69 now, I was diagnosed 6 years ago. So talk about late diagnosis. That's it. I didn't believe in ADHD, by the way, for my whole life. It didn't exist as far as I was concerned, even though I had 2 children who were. I was dragged kicking and screaming over the line, and only when they were diagnosed and I realized, hang on, this is me. So I sort of bumbled my way along. I think the main reason was that so after I decided I couldn't be a lawyer, I went into advertising as a copywriter because I had a gift for language and loved it. Just suited me so brilliantly. But I was working in, big American corporate ad agencies where there were lots of systems in place. I didn't have to do any of that. All I would do is get a pile of briefs on my desk, and I would just be able to have fun playing with words. And it was the dream job. And I did that for quite a few years in South Africa, where I was born, and then in Zimbabwe, where I went to escape the South African draft. And then when we came to Australia, I once again went into corporate American-based ad agencies. And that was the first time I really encountered, in Africa, things are you have to be much more adaptable because nothing works the way it's supposed to. And even if it does, it doesn't mean it's going to work tomorrow. So we have to be, it's very flexible, and you have to be adaptable. And that suited me because that is what I was. Yeah. Whereas in Australia, it's much more, the corporate structure I found much more rigid, much more hierarchical. And it didn't only lasted, I think, 9 months in my first and only job in corporate advertising in Australia before I was retrenched for basically failing to do what Crawford had identified, and that is the simple things. And also being, getting out of my area. So, and then I started freelancing, and that was fantastic. again, I didn't have to worry about structures. I could just do the work, hired by various agencies to do it. And it sort of snowballed from there. I think I was a bit naive, and I thought, oh, well, I can do the rest of it as well. So with my art director wife, we started an agency, we started getting clients, and then it sort of grew like Topsy. And I think the danger signs were that it grew very quickly. But we had no idea about process and all those support structures that actually had allowed us to do what we did. So in retrospect, I think now I can see that the main motivator was to get agency over my life. I think that was probably the real reason. And it's true now, and as it was then. Just to feel that I'm, because I mean, like everybody who with ADHD, I have that performance anxiety, or I think it's called efficacy anxiety, because know all that you're going to fail at the simple things. I love that thing. I've adopted it already, as you can see. I've used it twice. That analogy, but I think the reason also that I was able to it worked was because in advertising, where the currency is creativity, it's lateral thinking. For us, so certainly for me, lateral thinking is the default thinking. And neurotypical people, I've been part of those training sessions where you did the de Bono stuff about how to think laterally. And I think that in as much as it's difficult for neurotypical people to think laterally, and they have to do courses and so on to achieve that, to think outside the box, whereas for me, I was always thinking outside the box. There was no box. And so in that sense, you got that superpower in the important stuff, which is what you're being hired to do. And then these honestly ghastly failures at the most mundane, silly procedural stuff. So I think I didn't decide. It decided for me.
So I'm so interested to know, though, that mostly every business, even if you run a business for yourself, has a lot of interactions with those ghastly, annoying, pernickety, back-end, fiddly things that you don't enjoy. Like, to actually maintain a business, there are things that you have to do to keep all that happening, as well as the fun stuff and the creative stuff. So that's what I'm interested in. What rules and disciplines, or what did you do to make sure that for yourself and your own business that you could do that?
Oh, that was fundamentally important. So now I'm talking in retrospect, right? Post-diagnosis. Before, I was very fortunate, certainly with the beginning of the agency, was to find someone who was very good at that, neurotypical, but who also had the empathy to understand that she was dealing with a whole bunch of people like me who were all over the place. And those people exist, and there's certainly a lot of them in advertising industry who can understand how. Advertising the creative side is wall-to-wall ADHD people. I guarantee it. It's 90%.
Yeah, and sales.
Subsequently, though, and this is, I think, was the really interesting thing and empowering thing, is that recently my son has basically taken over the agency, and he's ADHD inattentive, which is like ADHD times 2. And so working with him to we had to even work even harder on the processes. And I think one of the most important things that we've learned is that as ADHD people, it's not that we don't know what to do, it's we have that difficulty in simply doing it. And so what we found was the most important thing was to strip away all irrelevant, non-informative information on a screen, for example. So a good example is that we only want to see the task. We don't need to see the list of bits and pieces that go with it, because all that does is make us anxious. It distracts, it makes us anxious, and we lose focus on. So keep focus is to say, okay, you've got to do an EDM next week to those people. That's all I need to know, and that's all the other people in the agency who are tasked with that sort of thing need to know. They don't need to know, write the thing, blah blah blah, tick off boxes in project management systems. They just want to know. It's like a flashcard, bang, and that's it. And then strip away everything else. So another a good example is, say, Microsoft's Teams and 365 and those project management systems, which to my brain is huge amounts of irrelevant information that I don't need. I want something real simple. And so we use a tool called Slack, for example, which is just about communications. Everything's very simple. Everything's layered. There's no distractions. And replacing email, for example, which is honestly, to my brain, I look at my email inbox sometimes and I just want to cry. It's just a mess. Then we dropped email completely and we only communicate through Slack. And that's really nice because it organizes everything under, in the right places. There's lots of messages there, but there's nothing irrelevant to distract me. I mean, that was the key thing. And then we tried literally every project management system known to humanity. And we eventually settled on Monday.com because it's the simplest thing. It's got nice little colors, like color the things together so I can see the pattern. That's that sort of thing. And by sort of, hook or by crook, one step and another, we found the system that works. No distractions, very focused, and it's working. Oh, and labels. So it's much like, tasks. Again, I hear the word and I sort of, and so we don't say tasks, we say things to do, and we don't say deadlines, we say goals, and those labels help to, I think, keep us all focused and motivated, I guess. Seems to be working anyway.
And I take it in your industry, because you're working on a client-facing business, hard date finishes is something that happens a lot, where if you don't finish it by the date that the client asks you to finish it for, then you don't get paid. So there is another motivation there.
Correct. And we have then an operations. Found the most gorgeous operations manager who understands perfectly how we work and think, and is able to interface with the client and make sense of it to the client. It's that sort of joining thing between the neurotypical and the neurodiverse, somebody who can understand both.
You found a broker. You found someone to broker it for you. That's awesome. Yes. And I do think there's going to be, it's a pity we might get a couple of questions in, but I think there's going to be heaps of questions around how you've done that, because I know that there's a lot of interest out there in ADHD and neurodivergent individuals around wanting to do something on their own, having an idea, having a real passion, but just not feeling that they could apply the discipline to do it. So I know that there's going to be follow-up in this, Andrew, but thank you for that. No. I'm going to come back to you again near the end. I'm not finished with questioning, but Mel, thanks for joining us, and thanks for being part of the panel. You, as an ADHD woman, are fascinating, because if you look at the number of areas of work that you have engaged in, if you look at the number of roles and activities that you've chosen to be part of and actually embarked upon as part of your professional career, mostly around impact, change and disability and advocacy. I mean, you've been highly driven. Your life has been driven by making a difference, getting involved, getting hands-on, shaping the way people do things, shaping the way services look, to the extent that you're on the board or you're part of the executive team in at least 4 or 5 different businesses, as well as a full-time job running a large support service that covers disability as one of the executive team. So to what extent do you think that your ADHD has played a part in driving that level of ambition and that ability to straddle so many different roles?
Well, look, Julie, I think it's interesting because people often ask me, how do you know that this has been your ADHD that has driven this, as opposed to if you didn't have ADHD, and basically, how do you know what that difference would look like? But I always say, like you mentioned, I sit on many different boards, and I have multiple different activities that I do from a voluntary perspective. And
Well, we've lost Mel.
I don't know how Mel does it.
I know. I'll maybe actually talk about that while she's out the room, and I'll let her know. But Mel is at least in 3 boards of businesses, all related to neurodiversity or neurodivergent design in terms of improving talent identification or skills identification. I'm just saying, Mel, that you're involved in at least 2 or 3 different organisations at a board level, helping people design and think about where they take their talent. So it was filling the gap for you.
Thank you.
On.
I was just going to say, and I think the question, that I always ask people, do you know anybody that does the things that I do? And the answer most people say is no. And what I'd say is that not everybody with ADHD, but me, my area that I'm extremely interested in and always have been, and my focused areas that kind of keeps me the way that I am and as kind of keen in the workspace is my work. I absolutely love what I do. I talk about it as being my hyper focus. And, for me, for example, I don't watch TV. I'm very, not often reading books. The only times I do, it's about, my particular interest areas, which is, obviously around disability, ADHD, neurodiversity. Everything that I do is that. So there isn't many people that actually have that focused area. But also can juggle multiple things in the way that I can. So, is it a good thing? It's absolutely amazing for me because I'm interested in it and I love it. And it's something that I really kind of put my mind to and focus on. So I think from a work perspective, my ADHD has drove me, because of my hyper focus, because of my interest in multiple different things at any given time, has enabled me to be able to achieve that. Many years ago, not so much. Trying to manage that, it was even harder. But now it's a lot easier for me to be able to have that focus and know what that looks like.
So you had diagnosis at around 19 or 20, so still not as a child, but reasonably young adult. So did you even see then at that point that in terms of how you were using your, I suppose, knowledge of what you knew about yourself then, were you using that to think about, well, I'm going to need to do stuff that gives me energy, keeps me sort of interested, or were you just basically working on autopilot, continuing to drive towards things that you were drawn to? How did you do that?
Yeah, probably a couple of things I'd comment to is that it wasn't my ADHD initially. I didn't notice at all. And even when I had a diagnosis of ADHD, I was kind of like, oh, that's not me. And talking to people actually said, did you not know? It was kind of really obvious for many years. I was like, no. But it was actually my dyslexia that created me challenges. And because of my dyslexia and having a dyslexia diagnosis, and then obviously talking about the other challenges I had that came about actually also as well, you have ADHD and also some other comorbidity. So from my perspective, my ADHD, I didn't notice. I didn't see that it was necessarily creating, I'm going to say some positives, but also many challenges for me. It was really at university, my challenges I felt were more to do with my dyslexia at the time. When I look back and now I know more about ADHD, obviously having lived with it and worked alongside many different individuals, young people and adults, there was many obvious signs, at university, having the ability to, I'm going to say, keep long-term friends. I had so many friends because I loved different people, lots of different things, still do. But my particular interest and my particular focus areas was my thing, which was obviously trying to learn about what I want to do. So some of those things and holding on to those things as a youth was quite difficult. And people understanding me, you have a conversation and you take over everybody. And then all of a sudden you go, actually, I've spoke the whole time. you know, many years ago, I used to go on dates, and probably I'd be 3 or 4 dates in, and somebody would go, tell me about him. And I go, I don't know anything about him. All I did was talk about me. I kind of realised that it's a turn-taking thing we have to do.
Okay, that's actually a good segue into the next question, because there are a lot of really driven and successful people and entrepreneurs and self-employed people out there that are ADHD, and this is potentially a future conference, and you and I have both spoke about this. This is potentially a future conference conversation, but what are the downsides to actually being so driven in pursuit of your career, your hyper focus and your passion? And does it affect your personal life? Like is there like sacrifices that you have to make?
Yeah, and I find those really hard, Julie, to be able to come to terms with and even know what they are. But what I can say is, from asking my friends and kind of all of my history of in relationships, there's a very common theme that I forget really important events like birthdays and activities that is supposed to happen that I don't turn up to because I get sidetracked with work. I'm in work, I'm focused down, and I forget these really important things. The other side of it as well is then, again, having a conversation with me. I'm so passionate and interested in my thing that sometimes it can be quite difficult because I get bored sometimes of other people's conversation. I've moved on because I want to talk about my thing, and I'm doing this. So what I would say is that's a really hard thing to be able to do sometimes. As an ADHD person, and to maintain focus on things that are so important, but I personally wouldn't necessarily see them as areas that I find a particular interest. They're important, but I have to maintain focus. And that took me a long time to do. So as a young person, I'd just walk off and be seen as ignorant. Nowadays, I know that I have to stay and look and remain focused and do those things because it's important, because people care and you care about that person and you don't want to hurt the person, but you need to that. So it impacts others, it impacts relationships quite a bit.
And that's that masking piece as well. It's putting that game face on because you kind of have to, because it would be inappropriate to like take the mask off and be like the daydreaming self when you know that there's something else or another tab or something else that you're pursuing in your head. So that is where that masking piece and those unwritten rules of how you actually interact. Because for you and I, like we probably do daydream, go off in one and start having 7 conversations and we're not offended by it. But for others, if they're in the middle of telling you something, and they've got a point to make and you're off on a tangent, that does have an impact. It does have an impact. I really hope that we do something more about this in future, because I do think there is an interesting piece around ADHD and how it impacts your personal world and how you interface with the personal world and what it looks like in relationships. So thank you for sharing that. Can I ask you as a final question, Mel, what's the most important lesson that you've learned in relation to your life and work in your ADHD, and what advice would you give to others?
Yeah, I'd probably say 2 things. Individual that I used to work with, and many people have said to me, but one person was very bold and said, Mel, you need to slow down. You can do it, but not everybody else can. So my lesson as a leader is really spending time getting to know each individual and their unique self, because not everybody wants to or can operate on multiple different things at multiple different times. And it's having that ability to be able to recognize when I'm not necessarily having everybody on my wavelength. So that's a really big thing in the workspace if you're a leader with ADHD. The other thing I would say is around your own health and well-being. So just because I'm, multiply doing different boards, different roles, different things, it doesn't mean it doesn't impact on my own health and well-being. So it's really making sure that I, as an individual, and I'd advise anybody to make sure that they're checking in with their own health and well-being, making sure that they're having time, for example, to eat, they're having time to do all of those regular walks or different things that you do. Because when you're hyper-focused, you can go 12 hours and you haven't got up, for example, to get a coffee. So it's just little things like that you have to check in with and make sure I've got little alerts to remind me of these things. So, checking in on those things, helping yourself out and making sure your own health and well-being is paramount as well.
Yeah, so not just being motivated in work, but being motivated to look after your own personal life and self-care. Like, that's important, not to let that struggle. Thank you for that. And I'm going to segue then to Rebecca. I'm going to ask you a question about, resilience and maintaining some sort of degree of functioning. But can you tell me, how do you maintain resilience, focus, and motivation? And it can be work and personal life, but obviously work is an important part of what you do. So how do you maintain your resilience, your focus, and your motivation?
I think for resilience, it's probably one I'm still working on and will be working on for the rest of my life. But whether it's work or personal life, I think for resilience, what I've learned is to be just my authentic self as much as possible. I think by being humorous, being myself, by teaching the people around me what I need, and like Mel said, learning what they need as well and kind of responding to that in the best way that I can. It's allowed for a space to be myself, which means I don't have to mask, which means I am more resilient. So it's not one kind of magic strategy that I've used. It literally is kind of being compassionate to myself, which allows my team to also understand my struggles, my strengths, and vice versa. So that helps me to be resilient both at work, at home. In terms of focus and motivation, like Mel, what I do is my hyper focus. I adore it. I also only read books if it's about disability or ADHD or acceptance and commitment therapy. Or I love to work. My social media stream is not Facebook or Instagram, but it's LinkedIn and reading all the latest research and stuff. And I that's what helps me stay focused most of the time. And I already spoke about the strategies that I use in terms of the way I set up my work day and things like that. And sometimes I do burn out. I'm not going to pretend that that's perfect all of the time. Sometimes I do burn out and sometimes I can't maintain focus. And I just allow myself the space to be like, okay, I did have this planned for today, but I'm actually unable to. And one of my favorite things to do is create Excel spreadsheets. And I really need to be able to move forward with a project. I need to be able to oversee the whole thing. So I'm quite different to you, Andrew. You said you like to just see the task. I can't. I need to know where it started, where it's going, why it's happening. Like, even if I think of what I was doing for ADHD Australia to make some resources, I couldn't just pick one resource to make. I needed to map out the resources, what they were going to look like, how they were going to be presented, what format. Once I've done that, then I can go back to the beginning and start. So if I'm struggling or I find myself in a place of losing focus, I go back to my Excel spreadsheets and I make a new one, and I've got a million. And sometimes they only last a week. Sometimes they last a lot longer. I think it's just forgiving yourself and allowing yourself to change with different.
The same person, Beck.
And it depends how your memory and how your visualization works. So that makes sense, especially if you do lose train or if there are those moments of burnout. That's what's so interesting about ADHD, that it is so different. And thank you for that. Andrew, same question to you. How do you maintain your focus, your motivation, and your resilience?
Yeah, resilience is an interesting one. I was just recently in a focus. I have been described as resilient. I was actually talking to someone. I said I've been described as resilient, but I don't feel like that I am. And she said something I found really interesting, that it's not, resilience is not that feeling that, not the absence of feeling bad about things that go wrong or aren't going to the way you want them to, but rather to just accept that feeling and to go do it anyway. So it's sort of a that, feel the fear and do it anyway is what I do.
Getting into it.
I'd be dishonest if I didn't say that my medication is absolutely, managing my medication is critical. But without that, it's really nothing happens. way, and which is weird because it did for 63 years somehow before that. I don't know how, but it did. So and I think what Mel was alluding to as well is a lot of self-awareness, and what Rebecca said sometimes, oh, it's just not going to happen today, and then accepting that thing and not trying to beat myself up because I failed to do that thing, but just to go to whoever it is and say, look, I'm afraid it's not going to happen today. It'll be tomorrow or whatever. So that acceptance that things are not always going to go the way you want them. Stop beating yourself about things that go wrong. And absolutely what Mel was saying again about making sure that I have the exercise, the self-awareness, the taking time out. So I've got a routine now where twice a day I go away from the workplace and just chill out. And I find that with exercise, all that the things going on in my head just drop away, and I can get a perspective back, and then I come back. So I do it twice a day, sort of late morning and late afternoon. And probably actually now, as these words are coming out of my mouth, I'm realizing that probably is the thing. Getting out, doing that exercise. It's the exercise is not. It's got physical, but it's actually much more. It's totally a mental thing. And I
it's
think
recentering yourself.
By doing stuff, it quietens all the noise. So let me nominate that. Let me say that. Getting out.
Thank you.
Getting away.
That's a good one. That's a good piece of advice. And Crawford, lastly to you, my question is, you've had some struggles, some recent struggles, but what advice would you give to other people that might be struggling, and what would you point them to sort of continue to do or to start doing?
Yeah. Can I swear?
You can. I think that it's an adult audience, but it's like so quickly.
No, I met a lot of neurotypical people, and guess what? Like, a whole heap of them are weird, and a whole heap of them are rubbish people. And there's a 50% chance they're not going to like you anyway. So, don't let their misunderstanding of your intent and your drivers and your, abilities become your narrative, right? And that's, that's an important one. But on a more serious note, right? And you mentioned it in a lot of the language we use, and I find us like in this safe space where we're talking to each other, we get it, and we talk about the boring tasks and the discipline and all the rest of it, right? But we live like there, and there's a lot of internalized ableism, right? I do it to myself. Like, I can advocate like a champion for any one of you or my clients or friends, but I can't do it for myself at work. And I come up against that, that it's that moralizing where it's like, oh, you don't want to do the boring stuff. Well, I don't want to do the boring stuff. We're all about ADHD, right? It's that.
Yeah.
I think we've got to be careful. We've got to change the language we use sometimes, because it's not that. It's a lot more about what Rebecca's talking about, Mel, all of us actually, Andrew, but processing information, right? It's sometimes it's not, we can't do it, we don't want to do it. I can be the best admin person you've ever seen, right? 5 answers a big plus for that, but you've got to put me in the zone. You've got to block out the distractions. You've got to get me running at it, right? It's the changing lanes that's a struggle, and it's if it's task-based, we're so context-driven that no matter what, I can't block out the other pieces, or it's not that I don't want to do this or I'm not focused. I'm focusing on this and the next step and the next step and the next step. So that's not to say I can't do it, don't want to do it. Like, it's more, I have to create the structures and the surroundings that allow me to do things in a certain way. Now, lo and behold, like internally, you can struggle with that. Lo and behold, there's this whole piece which I've done as a consultant, human-centered design. If you flip the narrative, right, and you go, I think the new book, Ludmila Praslova, right, The Canary in the Coal Mine, she talks about it where neurodivergent people tend to be the ones that pick up on the challenges, organizational design, the negative toxic traits, whatever. We pick up on it first because people are judging us more harshly. On a personal level, I may be retreating into my shell because I'm struggling with the basic stuff, and I'm not putting my hand up saying, hey, see, in that meeting where I was really engaged and we were talking, I was actually in ideas mode, because you want a divergent thinker, not a convergent thinker. But then when I went to my desk and I had to go and just punch out the 5 slides you wanted, I forgot, and I don't have written instructions. So that combination of verbal and written, there are practical tactics that combination, because I'll go away thinking, your boss might just look at you and go, oh, you were there, you were present, now why aren't you doing it? And I'm sitting there going, oh my goodness. And then next thing you know, I've redesigned a whole PowerPoint deck or a design, you've just gone off, and you're not working, you're just getting dragged along in the current of your brain, right? So you have to just be really deliberate, you know, and understand what type of brain you've got, where the currents are going to take you, and then just, you know, navigate that. But you know, and I'm getting quite passionate now, but one thing I will say is it's getting into a space where it's just surround yourself with the right people and the ability to communicate that, right? And I found this, I'm going to give him a shout out because my old director at Macquarie, Jamie, right? And he just understood, he got it, you know, and the difference between having someone there who quite literally just opens the door for you, just gives you a seat at the table, just goes, yeah, sometimes does say breathe, you know, recognizes that you're just overwhelming because you're trying too hard, right? But there would be times where, you know, you look in your diary and you go, oh, I've got a meeting with Jamie, boom, I'm off to a flyer, or I've got to do X, Y, and Z. The same thing, but it's just so challenging, right? And that is that realization that you're so externally, and it's not, again, a value judgment. People think, oh, you're just motivated externally. It's about internal. You've got to have that strength within, that discipline, that, you know, all that moralistic language that we use. No, it's not. It's because that's just how my brain works, that I need to create the surroundings so that I can play with. And, you know, it sounds, so I think we've got to control the narrative and the language a bit better and make it more strengths-based, human-centered design, and just get really good people.
Crawford, I'm going to have to wrap us, but can I get you to finish on the line? So I think that is a really good point. I think that creating a positive narrative as an ADHD person, to make sure that when you are talking about yourself, that you're not talking about it from a deficit-based, and actually, you mentioned Jamie as a person that you had the trust and the confidence to speak to. I think that's the other thing. It's about giving yourself permission to actually find out who your tribe is, because as you've got older, you've known that yourself. Surround yourself with the right people. Make sure that you can message it right. Make sure that you feel comfortable letting them know why you're thinking differently and why you're treating a task differently, or why you're in an ideas mode and why that won't work if you don't. I think giving yourself that permission, which has been really quite obvious through the conversations about people being authentic, people being clear about what they need, and people not dismissing what they need to work, but actually telling people what they need to actually work their best, is a really important thing to give yourself permission with.
Yeah, I will just say Trevor Noah, who is an absolute legend, and he, you know, obviously he's quite recently come out and disclosed his ADHD, but he was talking about it with Adam Grant, and he's talking about context. Great podcast, go and listen to it. But we're just so context driven. And you know what? If it's just a case of saying, can you just take a little bit more time to just give me the context, explain it, just so when I do get started, I get started, like Beck says, with the whole picture, not a small part. So I don't spend 4 hours trying to build my own context, which might not be the right one.
Yeah.
Hold me down. Sometimes it's just speed to getting things done. So yeah, it's just being able to turn it into positive.
Yeah, 100%, and giving people the reason why that you work that way. That's been a really interesting conversation, and we are out of time, but I do want to summarise the key bits. Like there's key areas there around, we do all have struggles, we do all have to plan differently, but we all work to our own sort of areas of what works for you, and it's about finding that, whether it's the listing things out, mapping things out, time blocking your time, or making things easier by just focusing on the basic information that you need. And hearing from people that regardless of whether you're in your own business or working for yourself or working in a high level or high demanding role, that you still experience the struggles. It still requires a level of motivation and engagement every day to keep yourself going. That might be that you need to give yourself tools, tips, time away, physical exercise, medication. There are things that we all have to do. But one of the key things that I understand from everybody that is in this session is a key factor of being successful, whether it's going out on your own or maintaining work, is to pick something that you're passionate about.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for that.